Well, certainly thanks to Chip and to Hall for their presentation, and thank you to John for putting this together. That's really great. This segment is called Designing a Digital District, and it kind of moves to the next segment of what can we do in our districts as we move forward. We've been working on that and find that there's some very challenging work here, but also have found that this really impacts our learners in a very positive way. And the other thing is, in the budget crisis that we're in, we find that it's actually a budget solution for us, which seems a bit counterintuitive. There are 4 panelists today that will be here to talk with us, and I know several of them from some of our work, and they're great folks, and I think you're going to really enjoy listening to them. There is Gregg Festa, who is the chair from ClassLink Advisory and Educational Leadership Team. So Gregg, he's getting mic'd up, but he's coming this way. There's Jill Hobson, and I met Jill actually earlier today. She's a technology director from Forsyth County Schools here in Georgia. Andy Ross, who is a partner that we have actually with Florida Virtual School, and he's a general manager and global services person. And last but not least, somebody we've been following his work for some time is Tom Vander Ark, CEO of Open Ed Solutions. And by the way, if you checked his blog on Friday, he tells you how to double our learning impact. Tom.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have been quiet and so well behaved. Anyway, it's fun to follow my friend Chip. You guys may know Chip well enough to know that he's an avid year-round water skier. That's a big deal when you live in Seattle, right? That means there's 9 months of cold and drizzle. So he gets out there under less than ideal circumstances. And I want to say thanks to Hall. That was a terrific, a fun hour of sort of random coolness. It's fun to follow both of those, and I'm going to try in 10 minutes to see if we can't do 3 things. I want to give you a quick conceptual. Let me see. There we go. I'm going to try to do 3 things in about 10 minutes. Give you a quick conceptual look at why I think the pivot to personal digital learning is a really big deal. Like one of the 3 or 4 most important things happening in the world. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how that's going to happen in most of your schools. And then 3, I'll talk briefly about Digital Learning Now, a policy framework introduced last December with some interesting recommendations. So really briefly, my sort of take on what Hall just described and what Chip just discussed is this historic pivot in the way we do school. It's easy to think about the stuff that we talked about, the tools and the sort of 21st century leadership things as sort of discrete elements of reform. But in the broad sweep of history, we're going to live through, in this decade, one of the most profound transitions in human history. In the last couple of years, we went through this threshold where if you have access to broadband, you can learn almost anything, anywhere. Almost anyone can learn almost anything, anywhere for free or cheap. That is a dramatic change in being human on this planet. I mean, it's connected more than 1 billion of us to the knowledge on the planet. That's a profound shift. So what Chip described, not a reform, but a phase shift. And the reason this is inevitable, that it is happening, whether you like it or not, whether you're participating or not, whether you're leading or not, is because your system is being enveloped in this informal web of learning, right? All of your kids have access to a great algebra teacher today. His name is Saul Khan, right? So regardless of what's happening in your schools, kids are able to learn at home, and some are not. So it's this new reality that we're living through, and we all have a choice about how we want to shape it. When I think about the from to, here's a couple of descriptions, and you guys know this stuff, but it is a big deal. It's a shift from print to digital. It's a shift from the age cohort Bismarckian school model that we've had for 150 years to teaching kids, not groups. Not just personalized learning, but customized learning. Right? And shifting from a teacher in a classroom with a group of kids to teams that work together with rich data sets to promote student learning. In short, it's the first chance that we really had to change the learning curve, to help more kids learn more, faster, and cheaper. So I just finished a book, which was a torturous process, and I had an editor that beat the out of me until we finally boiled down. She kept saying, what is this shift to personal digital learning about? And she finally helped me clarify these three benefits that getting smart focuses on. It's customization, motivation, and equalization. Here's how I encapsulate why I think this is a big deal. Customized learning compared to the teaching a group of age cohorts. The teaching a kid at the right level, leveraging their interests, and teaching them in the best possible modality will mean that kids will learn more per hour. So more learning per hour. John Danner said, the CEO of Rocket Ship Education, the best elementary schools in California, an early blended model, said he thinks the difference is 10x between a traditional lesson taught to the sort of middle of an age cohort compared to a lesson at the right level at the right time in the right learning modality. Maybe it's not 10x, but it's 2 or 3x. It's a substantial difference if we can get more learning time at the right level and in the best possible learning modality. So that's why I think customized learning is a big deal. Second, there's a lot we can learn from casual games to set the hook and to drag kids through difficult work. Persistence. Casual gamers know a lot about building persistence. They're magicians at calibration. Calibration just means getting the level of difficulty just right. We used to call it zone of proximal development, but it's teaching at exactly the right level. Just challenging enough that it'll keep you motivated, not too difficult that you quit. I'm convinced that leveraging interests and getting smart about motivational profiles is going to help extend learning time. It will help create a longer day. Customized playlists will help extend the day and extend the year. And then finally, equalization means creating a technology platform that creates 24/7, 365 access for every kid. Some kids have that today. Our challenge in the next 3 years is to create that for every student. Chip talked about some strategies for doing it. The key is building a plan with your district and your state on how you're going to do it. I think there's lots of dimensions of customization. I listed 10 in a recent blog. I want to talk about how this is going to happen in your school, and I call it blended learning. Some people will call it hybrid learning. But blended learning is different than ed tech. We've been doing ed tech for 20 years, and Chip and I have been leaders in Washington, and we did one-to-one schools. I started the first K-12 online school in the country. That stuff hasn't made as much of a difference as it should. Why is it different now? It's different. I think blended learning is different than just adding technology to the way we've always done school in two ways. The first is that it's an intentional shift in the learning environment to an online or computer-based environment for at least a portion of the day to improve student learning. So there's an intentional shift in the modality of learning to boost student learning. And secondly, that shift is made to improve school productivity, staffing and or facilities productivity. That means more learning, less money. So when I think of blended learning, particularly in a K-12 environment, I think about it in those two terms. Are kids learning more, and are we creating more sustainable schools? So in short, it's not blended learning in my definition if you're not changing your staffing model. So that's where it gets difficult, right? That's where this gets tough, because you're talking about differentiated staffing. That means different levels. And distributed teaching, that means some teachers teaching remotely. So if you're going to staff your school in a different way, that means a tough set of conversations at your next bargain. So that may mean a phased approach, but it means a different staffing model that costs less and works better. The best way to get up to speed on this is to read the Innosight Rise of Blended Learning. A lot of you have probably taken a look at that. The full report came out 2 months ago. It describes about 40 models in a lot of detail. You can just Google the Rise of Blended Learning or just look at Innosightinstitute.org, and it gives you a great description of all those models. And in Q&A, we're happy to go into more detail about that. Let me close with the policy implications. Digital Learning Now started a year ago in a conversation with former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who was a great education governor and has gotten even smarter about learning and learning technology since he left office. And when I visited him last June, he said, "Tom, I'm excited about where things are headed, but I sense that state lawmakers need a roadmap. We need to quickly find a way to give them a sense of what the next policy environment ought to look like." One sponsor called it the Constitution for the Revolution. He said, I think there ought to be a sort of a 10-element framework. And I described the data quality campaign, which was a really effective multi-year effort to outline the 10 elements of effective state longitudinal data systems. And I said it took 3 or 4 years to do that. And he said, "No, Tom, you don't understand. We have 27 new governors and probably that many chiefs starting in December. We need to be done in about 100 days." And so we designed a 100-day, 100-expert, 100-phone call process that resulted in the issuing of a report in December. Bob Weiss, the former governor of West Virginia, joined us as a co-chair for that and has turned out to be another terrific leader on digital learning. There's 10 elements. I'm just going to highlight a few. There are several in here that are going to be very controversial for most of you, and I'm sure the panel will react to that, and you'll probably get some favorable and some unfavorable reactions to some of these items. The most controversial, some of these that you'll probably agree with, at least conceptually, that students should all have access to high-quality digital learning, to the best teachers and to the best courses, that they all ought to advance based on demonstrated competence, not a birthday. That there ought to be multiple providers. Some of you won't like that idea, but the Digital Learning Now advocates for states to create a multiple provider environment. So in Florida, Florida Virtual is a terrific example of a partner to school districts that's offered for a decade great supplemental education. Digital Learning Now asked Florida to go a step farther and to create other statewide providers for full and part-time education. Probably the toughest recommendation for this group is the notion of fractional funding, money that follows the kid to the best learning experience, choice to the course level in a multi-provider environment. It's an unbundling, a way of thinking about a student's learning as not just a portfolio of work, but potentially a portfolio of education providers that collaborate to support the learning objectives for that student. Happy to discuss those more. We think there's some exciting potential behind that idea. We think it's a strategy that districts can use to offer more choice, improve quality, and save money. An example would be this fall you ought to be piloting upper division online courses. You should stop offering AP courses and offer those online. You can offer all 32 at consistent quality for less money than you're currently doing it. You ought to be launching in September a blended 610 math program, for example, and have a team of teachers work with 200, 300, 400 students in an individualized progress model online. You ought to be piloting some special services online. Speech therapies had big developments in the last year where we can deliver better, cheaper, and faster speech therapy online. So you ought to be setting up those kinds of pilots. The last item that's on the list is to make the shift to personal digital learning that Chip talked about. You need to work with your state to put a plan in place to make sure that every student has access and that your state has put a stake in the ground and has it planned to shift to online assessment sometime before 2014, when most states will be required to if they're part of the Common Core Race to the Top funded state assessment consortium. So you'll need to help the state plan for the shift to online assessment, and you and your state ought to simultaneously plan for a shift from print to digital instructional materials. And to do that, you're going to need to facilitate it with a one-to-one environment or with a high-access environment that may well include, bring your own technology to school. That kind of planning is complicated. It's difficult. It's going to require coordination between your district, within your district, and with other districts and across your state. But online assessment is coming in the next 3 years to most states. It's a great opportunity to put a stake in the ground and to build a 3 or 4 year phase plan starting next month. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy and let you kick off the comments to anything I've said or anything else you want to add.
Right. Thank you, Tom. My name's Andy Ross, and technically my title is I'm the General Manager for the Global Services Division for Florida Virtual School, which is a mouthful in itself. So let me take a second and explain to you what does that mean. So I work for this organization in Florida. I actually live here in Atlanta, Georgia, though, so it's kind of nice. Your location was perfect for today for me. And Florida Virtual started back in 1997 with a grant for 2 school districts in Florida that wanted to try something out of the box, and they wanted to try something that included distance learning. So the 2 school districts worked together. They came up with a program. They launched their first course, which happened to be computer science. They had 77 high-achieving white males take that first course, and lo and behold, they were very successful. And they said, well, this is pretty interesting, and a certain person, you heard his name already, Jeb Bush, took interest, and he started funding them with some line items from the governor's budget, and it started to grow. And he had some foresight that said, I think we have something here that we need to take advantage of. So in 2001, there was legislation passed that actually created Florida Virtual School as a school district. It's actually district number 72 in the state of Florida. There are 67 traditional districts. We work with all 67 districts, and we are one of the options today, and I'll talk about competition in a second because I think that's interesting there, that work with the school districts to provide an online program. And basically how it works is that a student in the state of Florida, whether they are a public, private, or homeschool student, may take our courses at no cost to themselves. The funding comes from the state, and if that student actually takes the course as one of their, let's say, 6 courses during the course of the normal day, that funding goes to us, and it does not go to the school district for that one course. If the student takes the course for the 7th or 8th period, then that funding is going to us, and the school district still receives their full funding. So there's an interesting funding model, but it's the only model that I know of in the country that allows for unlimited growth. And it has proven to be very successful for us and for the students in the state of Florida. Last week we ended our fiscal year, and as a state organization, as a state school district, we served 260,000 successful completions for the course of the year. which makes it the largest state virtual school there is in the country. You know, a few years ago, though, it pretty much was a monopoly, and we could do whatever we wanted to. And then the state said, you know, I think we need to introduce some competition. I think we need to have choices. And I actually like choices. I think choices, and my background is more from a business standpoint, makes you sharper. So the state has opened up the doors to allow other providers in the state, and they provide full-time programs. They're going to get into the part-time game as well. And actually that's made us a little bit more adaptable. So where we originally had one model where students take our course, we now have a whole bunch of different models that we work with students, because some school districts want their virtual courses taught in labs inside their school buildings. Some of them want them to be taking their courses outside the school buildings, wherever they want to be. And there's every combination in between. And so we offer a lot of those choices now within the state of Florida. A couple guidelines that we have is, first of all, we don't have, obviously, a school building. So we don't care where the student takes the courses. We don't have a school year. We are open 365 days a year, which means students enter our school every single day. So last Tuesday, because Monday was a holiday, we probably enrolled 10,000 students that day into whatever courses they want. We have over 120 courses that we offer. So we allow students to progress at their own pace, which is also one of our founding principles. How long does a student want to take this course? And so when they're ready to move on, they can move on. So I really admire that principle as well in those top 10. And we also have the student sort of tell us how they like to learn. So they dictate the path. This is a very individualized program. They are assigned a full-time, year-round teacher. And those teachers and those students have this relationship that they become very, very close. So you know if this student is really more of an audio learner or a visual learner and what their outside interests are and how they work. And you build this bond to get them through their courses and hopefully learn. The data shows that they're learning well. Their achievement on high-stake tests is been excellent. Our completion rate is excellent as well. We're at 85%, so that 260,000 enrollments were successful completions. Our goal is to be 90 and then higher than that. But it's been a phenomenal journey. It's just an amazing organization that I've been with. Now, outside the state also authorized us to create more or less a business where we share what we do with other state virtual schools and now with school districts. Originally, those customers were the state virtual programs, but now we're finding much more, as you heard Rick say, we work with him in Riverside, down to the school district level. And we actually work with Pearson. Pearson is our marketing and sales arm. We provide the content and the knowledge of how to do things. So today we're actually in 49 states, including Florida. So there's one state that's a little bit of a thorn in my side right now, but we're going to get to that one. And about 46 countries as well. And my particular role is I manage the programs outside the state of Florida. So that's who Florida Virtual is. That's a little bit about who I am.
The one thing that I'll add that's unique about Florida Virtual is that they have performance funding. So they get a portion of their funding up front and a portion when the student completes. And the Executive Committee of Digital Learning Now thought that was sort of the basis of a reasonable model.
It's a true accountability model. And we do a little bit of a prediction. We say, okay, we think we're going to have this many students, and that's the upfront funding. But if the student does not complete successfully, we get $0. Even if they've been there for 15 weeks, we get $0 for that. So it's good. And I think that model is excellent. Many states have asked us, you know, we were together in Ohio, and they've been adopting something similar because they like that accountability model. Okay.
Jill, what do you think?
Well, you mentioned BYOT, and I'll start by talking about what my district's been doing around Bring Your Own Technology. I'm in Forsyth County Schools, which is just a little north of here, about 40 miles to the north. We're a suburban, fast-growing, and high-achieving school district with 37,000 kids and 35 schools. About a year and a half ago, we began a process of trailblazing what it would look like if students were able to bring their own technologies into the building. Of course, that has so many different implications. As you mentioned, there's some policy and procedure implications. There are also some infrastructure kinds of implications that are involved in that. And so we worked with 7 schools and about 40 teachers to really sort of hammer out some of those kinds of issues and things that we would need to know if we were going to grow that program.
Were those schools K-12?
They were K-12. And I think our youngest classroom was 3rd grade, and of course we went all the way up to seniors. We worked on some policy issues around making sure that we changed our appropriate use agreements to say that it would be okay for students to bring tools into the classroom, that they would be allowed to use them, but at this point we are sticking with a plan that says students must use our internet connection, our filtered internet connection. So even if the device is a cell phone and has a data plan, they should not be using it. I'm under no illusion that that is happening all the time. And we do have to grapple with and figure out exactly how we're going to address that. You know, we've been very excited to hear Karen Cater start to talk about in terms of student-owned devices. But the other thing that changes is that when all the devices aren't the same. That's been a huge learning curve for us to understand the value of what that does in terms of differentiation and transformation in learning in the classroom. We subscribed to standardization. We were the ones, you know, oh, let's put laptop carts in every school, let's put desktops in every room. There's still a place to have some of those devices. Right. But when you bring all of the same device in the room, it's easy for a teacher to keep doing the same thing and just decorate it up with some technology. It's not as easy to keep doing that.
I'm curious, you must have had a number of teachers and probably some parents concerned about equity issues. So a kid brings a zippy new laptop or a tab to school and other kids don't have them. How do you deal with that?
We have had a few concerns, but probably less of that than you might expect. The reality is that every child doesn't have to have a device in order for learning to really go to a new level. There's lots of elbow buddy activities, and we do have some school-owned devices. As I referenced, laptops or desktops.
Are any of them going home?
Yes, the laptops will go home with the kids.
Being checked out with kids that can't afford them?
Right, and we're not necessarily yet at the point of providing the internet access to the home. Okay. We're looking into that now, but that hasn't been something we've achieved to date. So yes, we can send a laptop home with a kid, but that doesn't deal with that last hurdle of internet connection at home. Right. But we are seeing schools do things like stagger when the media specialist is in the building so that it can be open early or open late, and having specific dates and times when that's available. We cluster our schools together, so even things like the elementary, middle, and high school working out a plan so it's not a burden for any one school, but it's a shared burden across schools to meet that inequity.
Where is Scott? Scott Ross is still here? Yeah, Scott and I were talking about this at lunch. Scott's leading some efforts at Pearson. He's partnered with Mooresville and their one-to-one program, and he's helping other districts develop a one-to-one program. What we were talking about at lunchtime is the need for districts, perhaps in a phased basis, and probably utilizing BYOT to sort of over the next few years move to a cloud-based curriculum that's sort of optimized around 3 or 4 browsers that can run on whatever laptop and whatever tablet. Is that
well, obviously you have to rethink what you're adopting and what tools you have and whether or not they're going to work on multiple platforms. We are definitely paying a lot more attention to does it work on all devices, and we're pushing providers around when will you have it available for all devices. But the interesting thing is that now we can start to move into a model that says to a kid, okay, here's what you need to demonstrate to me if you're going to demonstrate mastery of this learning. How do you want to learn it? What tools do you have that will help you learn it? And how do you want to demonstrate it to me? And that may be different for all the kids that are there based on what device they have access to.
That's really an exciting way to put it, because it puts the focus on the demonstration of learning, right? And
absolutely.
It makes us get really clear about what would good look like if we saw it, right?
And it's more about the learning and less about the tool or the product. So we're not focused on every kid will create an X.
Yeah. That's such an important mindset, because it sort of connects to my earlier comment about, and Karen's talked about this, Karen Cater talked about this at SIIA, that if we can get really clear about sort of learning certification, what are the ways that kids are going to demonstrate what they need to know and be able to do, and if we can give them multiple pathways, and there's a bunch of informal pathways, like Khan Academy on the side, right? It's like, we're going to give you a lot of ways to learn. Here's the milestones, the benchmarks, the merit badges that you need to earn. That's a very different way to think about our role of facilitators of learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I would say is that we started with 40 teachers in 70 schools, and very quickly this has moved into nearly every school in our district. We did a tour in February of this year, and we started just sending out a little note saying, hey, if you'd like to come see some BYOT, come with us. And we figured, well, we'll just drive to the schools and everybody meet there. Right. Well, pretty quickly we had 20 people, and we started thinking, okay, next thing you knew, in 2 weeks we had 60 people signed up. These are all internal customers. So our site-based administrators, media specialists, and instructional technology specialists, we're all signing up to do it. It's grown like wildfire.
How do you deal with tech support?
Well, you don't have as much tech support.
Why?
Because the kids are the masters of their own device. So we're not, and we make it very clear, we're not going to be able to provide tech support for each individual device.
A teacher launches a lesson and it happens to be in Flash and it doesn't work on the Apple products in the room. They're not calling you with that problem, or they're figuring it out themselves?
Well, we have some strategies that we try to share up front in some professional learning for folks who are moving into BYOT. But again, we're moving away from a teacher expecting every kid to learn with the same tool at the same time in the same way. So no more is the teacher deciding, well, it's going to be the Flash-based thing. Right. It's more like, here's what we're learning. Here are some different ways you might do it. Yeah. You help each other based on which device. Yeah. Show the kids what you found. A lot more collaborative learning taking place. That's and great. A lot less of teacher-driven learning.
Closing thoughts. Help make sense of this.
Well, I was actually going to ask a question of Jill, which was, how are you in New Jersey? We're a little bit further behind than Florida was with the virtual school. We're just coming into online learning, and we have two charter schools that were recently approved to open in September to offer a virtual program. But I work through my role as the director of the ADP Center for Teacher Preparation and Learning Technologies at Montclair State University, longest title ever. I work with about 28 school districts in New Jersey who are really, at the beginning of this phase of exploring very informally on a classroom by classroom basis, in some respects allowing students to utilize their personal learning devices, as we like to call them. How are you dealing with the internet filtering issues? I know you mentioned that you try to mandate that they use the school network, but you know that that they're not always using that. How are you handling that from a...
Well, officially, we are saying that the policy is that students will use our filtered internet access, and we have a wireless array system, so we broadcast an access point for any device to connect to our wireless network. It puts them out straight to the internet and with filtered internet access. Right. So we have a very robust internet connection. What helps kids be willing to do that is that it does work. When they want to get on their own tool is when our stuff goes down. Mm-hmm. So we have to work pretty hard on making sure our network stays up and running continuously. And I will tell you, we have spent a lot of time and effort in increasing our bandwidth. I think we're now at about 350 meg is what we're pushing internet out to our schools through a fiber network. Because, and I know that's all techie geek speak, but the big thing is it's a huge pipe. It's the biggest pipe. It's as big as this room to push stuff back and forth. And that allows for a lot of people to be on the internet at the same time doing video, grabbing things. But we've had to also do some things like realizing the day we opened up the BYOT network and people started on it, we hit the max of our internet connection and we started analyzing what's going on there. Really quickly, we realized that they were streaming radio through things like Pandora. Anybody here ever heard of Pandora? It's a neat tool, and there's some great educational learning reasons to use it. But unfortunately, we had to say that is something we can't allow for because we don't have enough pipe to just allow continuous streaming of music. I had a question from a principal who said, hey, you know, I want to use Netflix as a way to do after-school movies. Not during learning time. We're not going to violate copyright in that way. We're going to use it in our after-school program. Sorry, we can't allow that because we still don't have enough infrastructure. Even though we have great infrastructure, we don't have enough for that. So I think we'll be grappling with how to deal with this internet filtering issue, and I want to be at the table with people like you who are starting to just play around with it and hear, what are you trying? What are you saying? What is your community reacting to when we start talking about bringing our own data plan into the classroom?
I mean, the biggest thing that the superintendents that I work with face is, and it can be construed as a negative term, but is control, right? So control of, and not even just what the students are accessing, but in some cases even what the teachers are accessing. And so they always seem reticent to this notion of cloud-based computing or bring your own device. And so what we're wrestling with is, you know, we have sort of these rogue classrooms that are becoming hybrid and blended classrooms, despite the school's intention otherwise. And that comes through a lot of professional development that we have offered these teachers. So the professional development is working, but the schools are resisting. So it's an interesting paradigm.
Let me go down this path for just a minute, because I think in the last couple of years, we've seen an increase of sort of backdoor utilization of, let's call it, supplemental materials. And teachers have always supplemented the curriculum, but now with rich digital resources, we're seeing a lot more of that, right? And I'm a partner in a venture fund called Learn Capital that has a number of new businesses that are really exploiting that fact. We have a learning platform called Edmodo, and as a matter of fact, I saw Dwight Jones from Clark. We were able to send him a note the other day and said, by the way, you know, 1,000 of your teachers are on Edmodo. So you have these sort of backdoor adoptions. We have a company called Manga High, these very cool middle grade math games that are all free that teachers are adopting. Khan Academy is this terrific, you know, OER resource. So we have teachers adopting and using really interesting technology, sometimes very appropriately and adequately, sometimes not, right? So that creates lots of new challenges for administrators and for superintendents. Mm-hmm. Talk about preparation. I mean, we've talked about a job that's really, really different, right? So,
and you know, one of the things that I do, in addition to advising ClassLink on their cloud computing initiatives, is reaching out to sort of the pioneers in the 28 school districts that we partner with through the Network for Educational Renewal. And one of the programs that's been quite successful is a program we call Digital Scholars, where we equipped about 20 school teachers in various grade levels and subject areas with a digital backpack, which is really just a one-size-fits-all sort of set of tools digital teaching tools, including a projector and laptop and all the kinds of things that you would imagine, a camera and a digital microscope, a Texas Instruments calculator. We put them into a Ning network, so we have a Facebook-like sort of professional learning network going on, and we do a series of professional development with them. But that's all very, very good, but the best part about the program is the scholar part of it, which is each one of those teachers is required to study and reflect on how they're using the technology in various pedagogical methods that they're employing in their classrooms. And it's a Dodge-funded project that results in a presentation at the end of the year, but also, more importantly, they become leaders within their district. And many of those teachers have moved to the flipped classroom model, even just on their own. So it was really interesting to
describe that. What's the 60-second version of a flipped classroom?
Okay. Actually, I'll try and tell it from my own perspective because I wish I had this when I was a student. I was a student who failed algebra twice. I had the same teacher twice. I was a student athlete, so I had algebra always at first period for 40 minutes, and then I went through the classroom. Right. I went through the school day. Went through my other 7 classes, lunch, all the social aspects of school, practice or a game, and then when I came home and I had to sit down and solve quadratic equations, lo and behold, I couldn't remember what the teacher taught me. Apparently, this failure is genetic. My parents couldn't help me. So I wish I had what we are seeing today with the Sal Khan stuff that you mentioned and lots of others, where teachers are creating these little 5-minute vignettes of instruction. Let's use the algebraic equation model. So a 5-minute process tutorial on how to solve a quadratic equation that student can come back and look at while they're doing their homework. That's one very small aspect of the flipped classroom. The real pedagogical shift in flipped classrooms is where you assign that entirely for the homework. And the homework, the actual solving of problems in this case, occurs with the teacher in the classroom during those 40 minutes. So you're maximizing the time the teacher has to actually provide that sort of personalized learning approach. And so that's what we've been experimenting with our Digital Scholars program, and I've seen it across, just sort of naturally across the districts that we work with.
I want to give a comment about your algebra to make you feel better.
Thanks.
We have 10,000 students in Florida who take Algebra 1 with us. 9,900 are taking them because they failed the first time. So we're the next choice. How can we save that student? And it was very much the same thing, the individual attention, getting them help, making vignettes if you'd like, or what have you. They just needed that extra push to explain what it was. Number one subject that they failed. So, interesting.
We have about 20 minutes left, and you guys have been so quiet. I would love to get some reaction, comments, or questions for any of you. Chip, you must have some thoughts about what you've heard, what you liked, what left you concerned, what we missed.
Is this one on? Oh, good. Okay, so we have 2 mics for this very moment. And Paul, why don't you take this one?
Chip, you want to kick us off with some reaction or questions for anybody up here? Okay.
While that's going on, I thought it was interesting. Jill was talking about the limitation of bandwidth, and we face that as well. But at the same time, looking at Andy doesn't deal with that issue because they're using student bandwidth entirely.
Well, not necessarily, because some of it's at home and a bunch of it's at school. A lot of it's lab.
At school now too.
A lot of it's lab-based.
But the school's not Florida virtual. The school is in the residential district, and all I'm suggesting is that dilemma may give us something to look at and think about as we move forward.
It could. I think I would just underscore Jill's challenge that I think in September we're going to have in 50,000 schools, we're going to have a problem with a kid hitting a game or a sim or a video and seeing the little dial. I think Doug Levin from CETA has been talking about this for 2 years, and I think this fall we will be choking on bandwidth. It'll become a much bigger issue by October. Chip.
Just especially your comments about being a CTO, what advice would you give superintendents around how to manage this tight filtering versus light filtering, buying more bandwidth, not buying bandwidth, bring your own devices versus buy your own devices, especially with superintendents who are trying to manage the politics of both community requirements, the politics of CTOs who in some cases are very open, in other cases are very controlling and trying to build a kingdom, if you will. I've seen both. What advice do you give superintendents in establishing the parameters around those questions?
Well, the first thing I would say, and Chip didn't pay me to say this, is if your CTO isn't involved in COSIN, then that's a good place to start, is to become part of a community of other chief technology officers who are grappling with this. And I don't think COSIN is in a place of saying there's any one solution, but they are about having thought leadership and talking through these issues. You know, I think the one thing I would say about bring your own technology is if you don't think it's happening in your district right now, you would be incorrect. It is happening whether you know it or not. The kids have them in their pockets. They're just using them under the desk. What we're doing is trying to leverage that tool in a way that affects learning and gets away from some of the negatives. We focused on using E-rate funds to increase our bandwidth. And we are not at a high level of qualifying for E-rate because we're very affluent, but still we've been able to do a lot by focusing on using E-rate funding for bandwidth. Filtering. BYOT forced us to have a very tough internal look around filtering, and we had been one of those places that had very tight filtering. What we've moved to is only the most egregious categories are now blocked for teachers, things that would have no business in a learning environment, but everything else is unblocked. And for students, we are still doing fairly tight filtering for them. But there is a process in place for teachers to request that a particular website be unblocked for student use. And that does go through a review process. Not every request can be honored. For instance, Pandora that I mentioned earlier. Great reasons to make it unblocked. Our infrastructure doesn't allow it.
Yes.
And I'm thinking in respect to self-sustaining dollars, replacing infrastructures, upgrading infrastructures, all of the components, equipment, bandwidth, all of those things that you've talked about. But the reality of every superintendent in every school system, how many dollars do I have each year to keep it going, and what is the best replacement cycle? And what is, you know, because you can read different sites everywhere from $78 to $478 per pupil has been indicated as a rate, if you could say, to have self-sustaining dollars based on per pupil ratio. What's your logic or your comments on that aspect of not just putting it in place, because once you teach it, train it, learn it, and use it, and it starts growing, how do you sustain it instead of all of a sudden it's just all needs to be replaced at once? And I'm here in Florida. I like the idea of the legislature stepping forward and doing some things. Why don't we do that at a national level?
I'm going to make two comments, and I'll let each of you guys respond. I think we were at or very close to this interesting threshold that I've been waiting for 15 years, which is about $250 per kid per year. You know, you can lease a Chromebook for 18 or 20 bucks a month. You can lease a Mac for about that, maybe a little bit more. You can get a netbook for less than that. You know, add total cost of ownership, and I think you can safely say that we've sort of passed that threshold, which is reasonably affordable, and particularly if you make the shift to online assessments and to digital instructional materials, right? If you stop buying textbooks and you're adopting digital materials. The second dynamic that will be changing is that you will be having a different conversation with your state, most likely, because when states pick their date for the shift to online assessments, if they haven't already, you'll be having a conversation with them about how you'll facilitate those, and it's going to require some kind of a high access environment, and that will provide superintendents a bit of leverage to encourage states to be a partner in creating high access environments. So number one, I think things have sort of passed a threshold of affordability if you budget correctly, and two, I think a lot of states are going to become a partner in creating access. Thoughts or different opinions on?
Tom, I also just wanted to ask a follow-up. There we go. Would you also agree that really when it comes to a financial standpoint, where by adding $250 for example, we're really playing around the edges, that where the real money in the system is, as you know, in our personnel, and that it's when we begin actually dealing with these contractual issues, et cetera, that's where we're going to squeeze the money out of it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So you can almost pay for a tablet, if you shift to online assessment, online instruction materials. The real leverage point is in a different staffing model, right? That's why Carpe Diem runs a great high school at $5,500 a year with 6 teachers for 300 kids, right? It's a very different staffing model. So that's where the real money is, and where the real opportunity to flip from a traditional cohort model to an individualized student progress model is.
I had a question, 2 questions really for Jill. So are y'all's procedures and policies posted on your website? And secondly, how did BYOT shift your classroom computer refresh strategies, or did it?
Yes, policies and procedures and other BYOT information is available on our website. Secondly, around refresh, that's still a fairly painful subject. We have been in a place of leasing nearly 100% of our equipment, and the economic downturn has changed that completely, and we're back to having to buy models instead of leasing. The thing about leasing, and this goes back to the earlier question, is that you can stagger what you're leasing and paying for each year so that you're not paying for everything all at one time, and get that on a plan. Unfortunately, economics have prevented us from doing that, and quite frankly, we ran into some real difficulties where our teacher laptops were getting ready to start their 5th year, and my boss was kind of in that place where he could feel the torches and the heat coming at him from those teachers who were saying there was no way they could even make them open the grade book or get to the student information system anymore. And we had to find a way to refresh that equipment. But it's definitely had an effect.
One thing that we're going to see in the next 14 months is tablets that are wrapped into service contracts. So you'll get a tablet along with a subscription to a digital content library and to some tutoring and to some professional development services. And so for $500 a kid, you'll buy curriculum, PD, online tutoring, and you'll get a tablet along with it. So it's really going to sort of shift from being the focal point to something that comes along almost free with a block of services that your district buys. Yeah.
One thing I want to mention about from a budget standpoint, as the technology improves, so we introduced some game courses. So not just elements that are games in the course, but an entire course that was a game.
What's it called? Conspiracy Code?
It's called Conspiracy Code, and it was very nice. We won a couple of Cody Awards for it and so forth. But the requirements from the pure system standpoint, not only from the teacher's model, but from the students, but at home, we had a huge concern there. So as we get into more and more games, you're going to find more and more high-end needs, and it adds a new complexity to the equation.
Greg, you had
I feel like we're sort of missing the boat on this conversation a little bit, because we're talking about how we're going to afford technology, And I feel like the previous two speakers and you as well, Tom, made a very good point that the technology is fast becoming the classroom, right? And we always afforded classrooms and all that went into them. And we didn't necessarily quantify those on a line item, the things that went into those classrooms. They were just assumed that they would be there. So I feel like in a lot of ways, and when I talk to superintendents in our state about this, I try to bring that up to them that this is really a utility now, just like electric and plumbing and all the other things that need to work all the time. And there are ways to make that a part of the sort of living budget, using tools like virtualization, cloud computing, bring your own. These are all ways that we can achieve that sort of mindset that we have to deal with our
all
budgets.
very true, but the guys in this room, starting in February of 2012, when you're planning your next budget, have a lot of tough conversations ahead of them, right? You need a new academic plan, you need a new staffing model, you need a new tech plan, you need a really good communication plan, you need a really good professional development plan, right? This is a big, complicated, multi-year project, and so you have these windows of the 2012-13 budget and the 13-14 budget that are really important of getting some phased changes in the next two budget cycles.
Yeah, and I'm not insensitive to that at all, but I do think that we're reaching a point now of critical mass, where I understand the current budget situations in New Jersey. It's probably worse than anywhere. But
it is time to plan the shift.
It is time to plan the shift, I believe, and we have some districts who did it 5 years ago in New Jersey and are now well ahead of the schedule and are moving into the Bring Your Own from the one-to-one laptop initiative fairly seamlessly and are actually saving money.
Right.
So.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Hi, Jill. Cheryl Abshire from Louisiana. I'd like you to expound a little bit on the concept of how the Bring Your Own technology initiative and the student-owned devices affects that classroom model of the teacher being the knowledge provider, and what type of, because I totally agree that the conversation's over about do we have the funding and the budget to provide the depth and magnitude of technology devices that students need and, more importantly, demand for the type of learning environments we need to provide. But I think there's still a pretty vigorous conversation about what do we provide, what kind of supports and training and professional learning to provide for teachers, because that classroom model shifts dramatically when every child opens up some type of device and has access to information that the teachers may not even be aware of. So how did Forsyth County help support and scaffold those teachers so that they could handle that magnitude of technology all day long in their classrooms?
I think it's a great question, and I don't know that we have all the answers. I really think that it's a community of learning. That's what we tried to create for our teachers in Forsyth that trailblazed and continue to add to that. We have an online learning management system that allows us to create an online space for folks who are doing BYOT in a classroom, and we have a way for them to be able to share with each other what they're up to, what they're learning, the strategies they've come up with. So we say some things to teachers like, instead of having them put it in the book bag or put it in under the desk or whatever, the technology is either up or down. Because when it's on the table and everybody can see it at all times, then you have that ability to kind of be monitoring what's happening in your room. If it's under the table, in the backpack, whatever, the kids may still be texting and you never know it. We talk about this idea of kids using the camera, and that is a huge concern. It turns out the place where it's the biggest concern is middle school. And I taught middle school, so I have sort of an affinity for why that is. But we talk about ways in which having that camera, that digital camera, is a powerful learning tool. So in the science classroom, taking a picture of the dissection and that being used for notes. In the math classroom, we have the kids creating con-like videos so that they are able to demonstrate how to solve a problem. These go into a funnel for the teacher to review and then post back out for the rest of the kids to use. I think building the learning community so that teachers become part of a community where they practice learning with their own devices. And I heard Hall talk about this a lot in his speech. Modeling is so critical. We try to model it in our professional development for teachers. We try to have teachers model it in the way that they start to approach it in the classroom, and we have students model it for each other in the way that they share their best ideas for using technology in the classroom.
Thanks. We have another one right here. Yes.
Yeah. How you doing? My name is Arnold Crater. I'm Executive Director for IT at the Illinois Math and Science Academy. I also just happen to be a member of the school board. In the IMSA environment, we're totally unfiltered, a very mature one-to-one environment. And on where I'm a school board member, it's totally the opposite. Totally filtered, very little technology, and actually really behind the times. And the comment I want to make is really around the concept of filtering, and the energy that's put into that is the same energy that we typically put into discipline and things like that related to managing the school environment. And with the entrance of the new technology, the 4G phones, the kids are going to set up their own MiFi internet access for the other kids in the classroom. So I would just recommend that you spend more time focused on teaching teachers how to manage the classroom and integrating technology into the curriculum, because the kids are going to, you're going to be dying on the wrong hill. The kids are going to be on another hill on the internet while you're focused on trying to filter them, and you won't even know where they are. So you just have to, I think you just need to, well, I would just recommend that you spend energy on integrating the technology in the curriculum and teaching teachers how to manage a new type of classroom as opposed to filtering, because you're going to lose that battle.
Thanks. Greg, do you have a response?
I was just going to say, managing an online classroom is, many of us remember, at least when I first started teaching, the way I managed my classroom was the way that my teacher managed me when I was in my classroom.
Right.
And one of the things that we're doing in the programs at Montclair State, we graduate about 900 new teachers a year, is all of the new teachers are required to take hybrid courses or blended learning courses. So they're learning in the same medium that their students will be learning with them. So they're getting that sense of and that experience. And we try to do the same thing with our professional development. We touch, as I said, 20 schools, but obviously it's not as pervasive as we would like. And I think that each district really needs to begin to adopt that kind of a model for their professional development, regardless of what the topic is, because it's going to get the teachers that experience that they need in that hybrid environment.
Great.
When we get a teacher at Florida Virtual, we have about 1,300 full-time teachers, and these are traditionally classroom teachers that you're going to bring into a different environment. And we have found that the upfront PD is one of the pivotal points of the stool. If you don't do it right and you keep it going, we offered last year over 900 hours of professional development all online for the teachers, plus we bring them back every so often for refreshers and new technologies, and this is what kids are able to use and so forth. And we have found if we don't have that relationship between the teacher and the student falls apart, because the teacher doesn't know, what these kids have.
Yeah, that's a big commitment to PD.
Huge, huge. It's probably one of the biggest things we do.
We have one last question from the audience, and then Tom, I'll put it to you to quickly say goodbye and make a last comment. And the rest of you, and the rest of you as well.
We have another comment, question?
Yeah, a question for Andy.
Yes.
So I understand, if you could elaborate a little bit more maybe on the business model, I guess, that Florida Virtual School has in place. So I understand within the state how if the courses are supplemental to the full-time equivalency model, that you get funding outside of what a local school district would get credit for. When you go outside the state of Florida, throughout the rest of the U.S., what is the business model that you approach in throughout those states where most of the, I guess, online full course and FTE equivalency range from we pay students to take online courses to we charge parents and students individually, or we swap credits back and forth between schools and districts. So how do you as an outside provider structure your offering and that kind of payment, I guess, in terms of offering your program outside of the state that funds you typically?
Good. Excellent question. What we have found is much of what we do outside of the state of Florida has really been dictated by virtual schools and school districts. They sort of tell us what they need. But primarily, I have found that school districts that are new to this area and don't have the experience and don't have the teacher base to teach kids like this ask us on the first year or two to be the complete shop. Here's the content, here's the management system, here's the teacher, have at it. So we teach the whole thing, and we actually charge in that tuition kind of a model $375 for a semester course. All right? Then we find customers who are more sophisticated, and they say, look, we want to use our own teachers, but you need to provide us with content and the LMS. So we can provide that, and that is about $95 per course, whether it's a semester or a full year. And that's per student that they have. So they tell us an enrollment. Then we have other customers who say, look, I would like to, all I want is your content. I don't need an LMS. I have all that. And we charge them again by an enrollment about $75 per course, whether it's a half credit or a full credit course. And the last group of customers that we have are probably the most sophisticated. Most of the time these are the state virtual programs, and they would like a perpetual type of license where they more or less own it, okay? And that ranges, according to the size of the school district, anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 for a course, depending upon their size. And where they plan to use it, and so forth. So we found those models generally. It's a good question.
So thank you, panelists. Just the closing comments, it's time to plan the shift. You'll be moving to an online assessment environment if you're not already. It's a great timeline to use as a lever to make this shift. Part of that 3-year plan ought to include provisions for bring your own technology to help create high-access environments. Part of that shift ought to include a set of blended pilots. I mentioned a few, but blended AP, blended upper division STEM is a great place to start. You can offer more choices, do it for consistent level of quality and save money. Blended math, 610 is a great place to look. Blended special services is another terrific area. In very small ways, you can start those in September in your district, and you can have an important example that you can be talking about for the next 2 years. Pick a great partner. There's Florida Virtual, Apex, North Carolina Virtual, Connections Academy, K-12. There are very good scaled providers that can help you with those pilots. And last, make your state a partner if they're not already. Work with your county superintendents and your states because you're not in this alone. It's work we need to do together. It's complicated work, but it's important work. I'm convinced it's the only path where we can get better results for the same or less money. And I think we've got, in most states, a few years of that ahead of us. So thank our panelists for joining us today.